Hello everyone, my name is Halvey. In this video we are going to see which Fire Emblem game has the most deployment slots. I'll be ranking these by the average of deployment slots of each game. I think that would be the best way to do this since the amount of chapters in each game varies. I will only be including main story chapters, guiding chapters, and paralogs, and I won't be including any DLC or skirmishes or anything like that. And I will only be counting chapters that actually have battle preparation since that is where the games give you a deployment limit and force you to select who you want to bring to the map. I won't be counting slots for units that are force deployed. Usually this would only be the main lord, but there are some times when multiple characters are force deployed. Just know that these numbers are referring to the additional units you can bring to a map, not the total amount of units you will have in the map. So an example would be like the final chapter of FE8. In total, you can bring 12 units to it, but 2 of those units are force deployed. So for that chapter, I only count 10. Another thing is that in FE7, the deployment slots change depending on the difficulty for Eliwood and Hector mode. So in the final rankings, FE7 will be ranked based on Eliwood normal mode, since that had the highest average deployment slots. But when we get to it, I will also go over the other modes as well. There are also 4 chapters in Radiant Dawn that have a higher deployment limit in easy mode compared to normal or hard, so again I will be ranking it based on easy mode since it is higher. There are also 3 games that I won't be including in this at all, these being Gaiden, Genealogy, and Echoes. For Gaiden and Echoes there are only deployment limits for dungeons and the final battle, and maybe a couple other things too. Then in all other major battles you can bring your full army. Gaiden actually forces you to deploy all of your units, and in Echoes they added battle preparations where you can undeploy units if you would like. So since for most maps you can use your entire army, I will not be including these 2. Genealogy allows you to use your entire army for every map, and its battle preparations come in the form of the home castles that you begin each chapter in, where you can just leave units in there if you don't want to use them, and you can bring units out or put them back in each map's home castle at any time really. So this game won't be included here either. The purpose of this video really is to see which games are stingy with their deployment slots and which ones are on the more generous side. So when I took the averages, I just rounded to the nearest 10th. That way there won't be multiple games tied at the same rank, although even with rounding there are still 2 games that are tied. Now I will be starting with the game with the lowest average deployment slots, and that game is 3 Houses with a total of 573 deployment slots across 68 chapters, giving it an average of 8.4. This is accounting for all of Part 1 and then every route and chapter in Part 2, as well as all of the paralogs. If you are wondering how all of this breaks down by route or part or by paralogs, I will have it all up on screen. For Part 1 there are 2 chapter 12s, since the Crimson Flower version is different from the other routes. Silver Snow has the highest average because there is no second lord. Violet is the only force deployed unit in most of those maps, if not all of them. Part 1 has the lowest average because none of those maps let you bring more than 9 additional units, and chapter 1 only has 3 slots. Overall, there aren't any maps that will let you bring more than 11 additional units, so 3 Houses just doesn't want you to use a lot of units. Next is New Mystery of the Emblem with a total of 293 deployment slots across 33 chapters, giving it an average of 8.9. So I included all of the Gaiden chapters in this, and they are the main reason why FE12 is so low. Those chapters only let you bring 6 additional units usually. There are also 3 of the prologue chapters that have battle preps and have low deployments. While the deployment slots are similar, one important difference between this game and 3 Houses is the size of the cast. FE12 has one of, if not the biggest cast of characters in the series, and 3 Houses has a small cast, especially if you don't work hard to recruit characters outside of your own house during Part 1. Next is Engage with a total of 365 deployment slots across 38 chapters, giving it an average of 9.6. Engage definitely felt like his deployment slots were pretty low when I first played it. One problem that I had is that a lot of units join automatically on turn 1 in a map, and because of that your deployment slots will be very limited, and you will have to bench units that you have been using and would like to continue to use, and the game seems like it's trying to force you to use the new units. This is most apparent in the first 2 Soul maps. Next is the Blazing Blade with a total of 289 deployment slots across 28 28 chapters, giving it an average of 10.3. This is Eliwood normal mode, but I will go ahead and show the results for the other modes as well. All of these have Lin mode included. I included all guidance chapters, and for maps with alternate versions, I only used the one with more deployment slots. FE7 is kind of all over the place with its deployment slots. At the high end, there's chapter 29 of Eliwood normal mode that has 15 deployment slots, and at the low end, there's chapter 30 of Hector hard mode that has only one slot. Next is the Sacred Stones with a total of 189 deployment slots across 18 chapters, giving it an average of 10.5. I only used one route for this, and Erica's and Ephraim's routes both have the same amount of deployment slots, so it didn't matter which one I used. For the most part, FE8's deployment slots steadily increase as you progress through the game, rapidly increasing to 16 and 17 for chapters 19 and 20, and then the final chapter limits you to 10 units. Next is Radiant Dawn with a total of 351 deployment slots across 33 chapters for an average of 10.6. This is for easy mode. Normal and hard mode would be 10.2 because there are 4 chapters in part 4 that have less deployment slots than easy mode for whatever reason. One thing to note is that I counted stage 1 and 2 of part 1 chapter 6 separately because stage 2 does have its own battle prep screen where you can deploy or undeploy your units. One thing about FE10 is that there are many chapters where multiple units are force deployed. Next is a tie between Path of Radiance and Fates. FE9 has a total of 242 deployment slots across 22 chapters, giving it an average of 11. Fates has a total of 960 deployment slots across 87 chapters, giving it an average of 11 as well. FE9 is exactly 11, while Fates was slightly higher but still rounded down to 11. For FE9, while it is true that battle preps are unlocked at chapter 3, I didn't start counting until chapter 8 because up to that point, all of your units are force deployed each map. Another thing is that there are 4 parts to chapter 17, but I only counted it as one chapter because in between each part there is only the option to call in reinforcements, and I did account for the reinforcement slots for the total deployment slots for this chapter. Clash has the most deployment slots in this game, and the extra units you can bring into that map are definitely helpful. I decided to do all of Fates as a whole, but I will show on screen the averages for each route and the paralogs. I think Fates does a pretty good job with deployment slots. They are a little strange in Revelation, but what's not strange in that game? Next is the Binding Blade with a total of 291 deployment slots across 25 chapters for an average of 11.6. I went with the West route for chapters 10 and 11, and I went with the Sakai route over Ilia because Sakai has more deployment slots. I did not include the final chapter because it does not have battle preps, and your team is carried over from chapter 24. Most of the guidance chapters have low deployment slots, but for the main chapters it's pretty generous, especially for the massive battle, that is chapter 21, where you can bring 17 additional units. Next is Thracia 776 with a total of 288 deployment slots across 24 chapters, giving it an average of exactly 12. I included the A route for chapters 16 and 17 since it gives more deployment slots than the B routes. The first half of this game is a little stingy with deployment slots in some chapters, but the second half is very generous. Chapter 19 lets you bring 19 additional units, which is the most we've seen so far in this video. Next is Awakening with a total of 567 deployment slots across 47 chapters, giving it an average of 12.1. I did include the Spot Pass paralogs. I don't consider them as DLC. The outlier here is Paralog 23 with 29 deployment slots, meaning that you can bring a total of 30 units into this chapter. Not necessarily the most units you can have in a chapter, but it is the most you can bring into a map from the deployment screen. Next is Mystery of the Emblem with a total of 490 deployment slots across 40 chapters, giving it an average of 12.3. This is combining both book 1 and 2, but I will also go ahead and show the averages for them separated. I only counted Endgame 2 in Book 2 as one chapter. It has 3 parts to it, but you can't save or do any battle preps for parts 2 or 3, so the units you bring in part 1 carry over to parts 2 and 3. Next is Shadow Dragon with a total of 337 deployment slots across 27 chapters, giving it an average of 12.5. The addition of the guidance chapters is what brings this game's average down, as they all have 11 deployment slots, which is slightly less than most of the rest of the game. And lastly is Shadow Dragon and the Blade of Light light, with a total of 287 deployment slots across 22 chapters, giving it an average of 13. A lot of the indoor maps have lower deployment slots, but for the most part you can use a lot of units in FE1 throughout most of the game. And with all that said, this is the end of the video. Thank you for watching, and if you enjoyed it, like, comment, subscribe, and have a great rest of your day.